It's sort of the ultimate example of life imitating art. To most of us, a horror movie is nothing more than a simple means of entertainment, but to a select few, it's a trigger that unleashes a murderous sociopathic rampage. These are 10 real-life killers inspired by horror movies. Natural Born Killers has inspired some of the most gruesome copycat killings in history. The film has been associated with several serial killers, including homicidal couple Sarah Edmondson and Benjamin Darris. In 1995, the murderous duo dropped LSD and watched Natural Born Killers repeatedly before going on a drug-fueled crime spree of robbing and shooting a convenience store clerk that left her a quadriplegic. During the crime spree, Darris shot and killed a Mississippi businessman. Edmondson was sentenced to 35 years in prison, and Darris is doing life. The premise of Child's Play was always going to cause public unrest upon release, as mixing children and violence is never the best idea. But I doubt the makers of the Child's Play series quite imagined just what a controversy they would end up in. Child's Play became particularly infamous in the UK for a couple of particularly shocking murders. In the case of Suzanne Capper, a 16-year-old girl who was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by 6 people. Her tragic death was linked to Child's Play because during the horrific torture, the perpetrators played a recording of one of them saying, "I'm Chucky, wanna play?" over and over again. This led to a huge crackdown on violent films, and new legislation was put in place. The second incident, Robert Thompson and John Venables were 10 years old when they kidnapped and brutally murdered 2-year-old James Bulger in Liverpool. In 1993, Thompson and Venables snatched the toddler from a shopping mall and took him to a railway line, where they beat and sexually assaulted the young boy. They left Bulger's mutilated body on the railway tracks to die. Thompson and Venables were supposedly inspired by the horror film Child's Play 3. Surprisingly though, that's not the worst murder case linked to Child's Play. Martin Bryant killed 35 people and injured 23 others in the Port Arthur Massacre. It is the deadliest ever rampage by a lone gunman. The Tasmanian outcast had an incredibly low IQ of just 66 and was a social pariah who was described as distant, unemotional, and disruptive by his teachers and parents. He also had a history of torturing animals. Bryant was obviously disturbed long before he committed the murders at the age of 29, but his obsession with the movie Child's Play was submitted by his psychiatrist as one of the factors that caused Bryant's explosion of violence. Later diagnosed as a schizophrenic, Bryant became obsessed with the childlike characteristics of the doll and its ability to wreak vengeful destruction. In 2004, Michael Hernandez, 14, stabbed his middle school classmate to death and admitted to modeling his behavior after the serial killers in American Psycho and The Silence of the Lambs. The South Florida teen said he identified with the horror movie murderers and wanted to act out their roles in his real-life plan to become a serial killer. Hernandez believed God gave him special powers and agreed with his decision to kill his classmate. The teen boy was found guilty of first-degree murder in 2008. Wes Craven's slasher movie series, Scream, was the inspiration behind the murder of Gina Castillo by her 16-year-old son and his 15-year-old cousin, Samuel Ramirez. The two teenagers confessed to the gruesome murder of Castillo and admitted that they did it because they needed money to fund a murder spree that would reenact the storyline of the first 2 Hollywood Scream movies. In order to follow the Scream storyline, the teenage boys planned to buy the ghost face mask and electronic voice boxes that are seen in the movie. But, just like Child's Play, this movie franchise is also linked to more than one blood-hungry maniac. Although there have been a number of copycat murders involving the iconic Scream mask, the crime committed by Thierry Jaredin is perhaps the most haunting. The 24-year-old Belgian lorry driver chose 15-year-old Alison Cambier as his victim and enticed her a few doors down to his own home to exchange videotapes. When the young girl rejected an amorous pass by Jaredin, his retribution was swift and brutal. After excusing himself for a few seconds, Jaredin whipped on his Scream costume, complete with black robes and 2 enormous kitchen knives. He covered Cambier's mouth to muffle her screams and stabbed her over 30 times. Jaredin then carried her bloodied corpse to his bed and laid her down along with a single rose, calling Allison's parents and the police to confess his unthinkable crimes. He later told the police that the crime had been premeditated and had been motivated by the Wes Craven movies. While The Dark Knight may not be technically a horror movie, it has its fair share of dark themes and violence. James Egan Holmes entered a midnight screening of The Dark Knight Rises and released debilitating tear gas before murdering 12 people and injuring 70 more in a mass shooting. The orange-haired killer reportedly shouted, "I am the Joker," before he opened fire on the crowds. Many audience members thought it was a publicity stunt due to Holmes' bizarre tactical clothing. After he was arrested, Holmes revealed his apartment had been booby-trapped with explosive devices, in what appeared to be an homage to the Joker. The apartment was stuffed with more than 30 homemade grenades wired to a control box in the kitchen and 10 gallons of gasoline. The story of A Clockwork Orange is as infamous as any in film, and the backlash was so fierce that Stanley Kubrick voluntarily withdrew it from distribution in the UK because of threats to him and his family. There are numerous cases of copycat crimes in regards to A Clockwork Orange, such as a gang of young boys beating a homeless man to death, mirroring an early scene from the film. More notoriously, a girl was gang raped by a group of men who were singing in the Rain whilst committing the act, imitating the actions of Alex and his droogs. The association to these crimes hurt the film and Kubrick massively, and the film remained banned and locked away until the great director's death in 1999. The famous 80s horror film Nightmare on Elm Street was the inspiration for Daniel Gonzalez's killing spree. In 2004, the paranoid schizophrenic went on a drug-fueled rampage and murdered 4 random people, including a doctor and his wife. Gonzalez armed himself with several knives and acted out a Freddy Krueger-like spree. Official reports claimed that Gonzalez did not receive proper treatment for his mental condition. He was given 6 life sentences for the 4 murders, as well as 2 attempted murders throughout England. In 2004, Gonzalez committed suicide in his cell. In 2002, Alan Menzies murdered his longtime friend, Thomas McKendrick, because he claimed a character in the vampire movie, Queen of the Damned, told him to do it and promised to make him a vampire in the next life. After watching the film about 100 times and receiving a visit from the female vampire Akasha in the middle of the night, he decided to murder people. Menzies also believed that McKendrick and another friend were plotting to kill him, but he turned on McKendrick first. Menzies stabbed his friend to death, drank his blood, and ate part of his head before burying him in a shallow grave. The quote, "vampire killer" was later found dead in his prison cell from an apparent suicide. As you can imagine, there are so many real-life murders and crimes that have stemmed from the Saw franchise, so many that it's impossible to list them all. Here are a few of those crimes. Jigsaw coerces his victims into doing what he wants, using deadly traps, such as a reverse bear trap strapped to the head. In 2003, Brian Douglas Wells was commanded to rob a bank with an explosive device strapped around his neck. Police suspected that Wells may have been involved in the robbery plot, but that he did not realize the device was armed. When the triple-banded collar exploded, a fist-sized hole blasted through Wells' chest, killing him. In Saw 4, Art Blank's spinal cord is severed. Matthew Tinling murdered his roommate, using the move he'd copied from Saw 4 to sever the spinal cord. Tinling used the torture to get his victim, Richard Hamilton, to hand over his credit card number so that he could buy crack. In the Saw movie, Jigsaw cuts jigsaw-shaped pieces from his victims' bodies as his calling card, a brutal message to the law enforcement. Stephen Marshall was nicknamed the Jigsaw Killer by the press after he would cut up pieces of his victims' bodies and scatter them. Killer Luca Magnotta went a step further. He cut off pieces of his victims and sent them to the authorities as a bloody message.